China keeps seeming to produce more cool things, and all the while, we're still under the impression that they don't really have access to the hardware that the U.S. teams have,
Yeah.
which has sort of pushed the envelope in terms of innovation. They've been forced to innovate. Welcome to Practical AI, everybody. My name's Jeff. I'm here with Peter Lynn. Practical AI is brought to you by Pocket AI. Pocket AI is a tool you can use to edit the weights of your model. With Pocket AI, you can prune over 60% of the weights in your model while increasing accuracy. Peter, it's kind of back to China today. We had your buddy Jensen Wang just sort of dropped a comment. He didn't necessarily say that China was ahead, but he also said they weren't really behind anymore. And this seemed to kind of ruffle some feathers. Explain a little bit where Jensen's coming from and why people care so much about this conversation.
I think people care because, as an outsider of Silicon Valley, to you and I and everyone that's on the East Coast or the rest of the country, it all looks like these guys like Jensen and Eric Schmidt and Sam Altman and all these, Peter Thiels and so on. And Silicon Valley seems to have like this inside track on things. And so when they say things, the rest of the country thinks, oh, clearly these are experts and they know what they're talking about. But that's not actually true because last year Schmidt was saying, oh, China's probably 2 to 3 years behind. We're still got a lead. And then this year he's saying, well, no, they've caught up and they're going to pass us soon. And so Jensen was asked a similar question, like, how far is China in terms of being behind? He's like, no, they're right next to us now.
Yeah, so I think it was Eric in one of his monologues that basically stated like you can dream, right, of like what this could mean, and it's like almost this information war that could cascade into a number of different problems for whoever's not the winner, right? But more tactically speaking, China keeps seeming to produce more cool things. And all the while, we're still under the impression that they don't really have access to the hardware that the U.S. teams have,
Yeah.
which has sort of pushed the envelope in terms of innovation. They've been forced to innovate.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about, kind of what they've produced, including some of the new models that have come out.
Yeah. So, Tencent, ByteDance, and DeepSeek have all released new models. And so the big question, the way that Silicon Valley likes to frame things is it's the US versus everyone else. But really that's not the case, right? That's their marketing pitch of like, we have to defend the US, but what they really mean is we have to defend our position and we're the kings of the US. So screw Europe, screw Asia, screw everyone else. And so that's their perspective. Because if you ask people in Germany and France and Spain, like they don't like what's happening in the US because we're hoarding all the resources. Right. So when we listen to people like Eric Schmidt and the Peter Thiels and people like that, their perspective is very kind of one-sided. Whereas if you look at the open source world, to me, it's more about open source world versus the proprietary world that wants to rule and enslave the world. And I've always felt like open source was going to win. And with what's come out from Meta, from DeepSeek, from Tencent and ByteDance and all these other companies, open source is winning.
One of the ones that came out of China, I think, was Quen
Yeah.
3 or one of these.
Yeah.
And then I think it's, amongst others, is scoring very well against the benchmarks.
Yeah.
Last week we talked a little bit about the benchmarking and a little bit in terms of you can get really good at the benchmarks or some refined in some area, right?
Yep.
And then start to deteriorate in other areas. Is that kind of a universal problem, even in the open source models out of China, or are they taking a different approach altogether in terms of Gen AI and sort of the reasoning side of AI?
So the Chinese firms seem to be trying to do things a little different, right? So the Quen one is like 300 something billion parameters, but the active parameters is much smaller. So they're taking a similar approach to DeepSeek, which is we're going to train up a bunch of specialized agents. So we're doing a mixture of agents. And then when you ask it a prompt, it's going to go, oh, okay, which is the best agent to use? All right. And so their kind of solution to this problem of once you have a monolithic model and you refine it and then it starts to get tunnel vision, well, their idea is, well, let's build smaller, more specific models, and then let's only use the models that we need. So that's the active part. So you might have a trillion parameters, but you only want like maybe 22 billion that are active, or maybe 100 billion that's active. And so then that gives you kind of, it doesn't solve the general AGI problem, which Yang LeCun is saying like, no, that's LLMs are not gonna get us there. They're useful, they're powerful, they do a lot of cool things, but they don't fundamentally understand things in a way that humans understand. And more importantly, is that it doesn't actually understand concepts. And it's easy to prove that.
Okay, so I want to come back to that sort of reasoning and reasoning AI and kind of how people are talking about that. But before we do that, you were talking about how they've basically carved it up into different buckets, right? So there's some orchestration that happens. You query and it says, "Hey, let's go over to this model or side model or part of the model, however it's doing that."
Yep.
I'm assuming that this is a great way for them to sort of keep this from, let's run it over to the math model
Right.
so that the math model doesn't like lose its mind and start to forget how to speak English, right?
Right.
And even if it does, it doesn't matter. We would funnel the other question over to the other side of the model or the other model altogether. Is that kind of what's happening, where it's basically
Well, so it's more than that, right? So let's say you've trained up a model for physics and one for math. And let's say you ask a question that's actually both, right? If you take the OpenAI approach where you only have four models and one is for physics and math, all right? So you ask it a question and it'll probably do pretty good. It'll give you the answer, you'll probably be satisfied. But once you get deeper into a harder thing, because it's more general to like two topics, a more specialized like mixture of agents that's got like 100 agents that are super specialized to like general physics, more advanced physics, nuclear physics, and quantum physics. And so now when you ask it a question, it can send that prompt to multiple agents, get the results back, and then evaluate all those responses and then combine it into one final answer. And so so basically it's still tunnel vision, but the tunnel's wider. And so ideally you want it to get as much response as it can out of different agents, and then you pick the best stuff out of all those responses to give you the final answer.
Okay, so this is probably the right lead in then to this whole concept of reasoning. And these reasoning models, or like O1 from ChatGPT, Quen, which is another one, I think. What are they doing that? Is that kind of what they're doing? They're basically orchestrating and carving, or are they doing another thing on top of the Gen AI thing in the front?
So the simplest explanation is in the old days when you asked the prompt, it would go through, process it, and just spit out an answer. Now they built this so that when you ask it a question, if you turn on reasoning, it'll go through and it'll cycle. It'll keep running. So it'll run for a couple minutes. And in this year's GTC, Jensen said, well, once you turn on reasoning, we can tell it, here's my prompt. You have 24 hours to think about it before you give me a response. And so that's where he got his kind of like, this is how you scale LLMs, and this is why you need more NVIDIA hardware because the number of tokens you're going to use to answer your prompt went up a million times. Because instead
Yeah.
of being 30 seconds, you say, I'm going to give you a month. Well, if you give it a month, you're going to consume more than a million tokens. You're going to consume probably 100 million tokens.
But what are like just so they just let it run?
So
Like,
run. Yeah.
but is it still thinking? Or I mean,
Yep. So it's generating multiple responses. It's evaluating all those responses, and then it's going back and then so it's just iterating over it. So in the same way that a student, let's say a student's learning algebra, so you go to class and the teacher says, okay, we're going to learn the basics of algebra. Here's what an equation is. And then as you learn more and more and more, the teacher adds more things to the equations. And then maybe, at some point, she throws in a word problem that's an equation, but it's phrased in a paragraph. And so now you have to then pick out, like, oh, okay, it's in a paragraph form now. It's not written as A2 plus 5B equals to C7, blah, 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 right? So now it's written in a paragraph. You have to mentally go, okay, this maps into this actual equation,
okay.
and then I can solve it.
So you're talking about the training side, not the runtime. Okay.
Well, no, no. So this is runtime.
Oh, it is. So,
Runtime. So you tell it, like, okay, here's my prompt, and then it processes it again and again and again and again and again,
but is
and
it
then
just
evaluates.
asking the same question? Because if I ask you what's 2 + 2 = 4, I don't need you to run all day and just answer the same question as four.
LLMs do though.
Why?
Well, because in order to make sure it gets the right answer, let's say you ask it, give me a proof that 2 + 2 = 4. That's different than add 2 + 2.
Okay. So you basically needed to produce a bunch of different responses, but a bunch of different proofs,
Yeah,
and then test the proofs and
right.
check the proofs and okay. Okay. Yeah, I can see why Jensen would love that.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, it's like, yep. It's like more hardware, buy more,
But
save more.
do we know like what's actually happening within the parameters and the structure of the models and stuff like that, that it's actually benefiting from doing that? I mean, is it
So the
creating more
evidence,
weights?
no. So the evidence shows that if you let it reason and run multiple cycles and tell it to, so basically what they've done is like you tell it generate me 20 different responses to this, and then compare the results, and then after you've compared the results, refine it. So you like chain together these series of prompts to tell it to continually improve the response, right? So this is the chain of thought. So basically, they've built in chain of thought into it to tell it how to think and how to reason, and so that gives you a better result.
Got it. Good stuff. All right, Peter. Thank you. This is helpful. It's fun to watch the competition now that it's gone global. It's the level of innovation I think is just compounding now, right? So
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
cool to see,
and
and it benefits the user. Obviously, we're the beneficiaries of all this. You can follow us on Spotify. We'll be back next time with some more topics, and if you have any ideas, we'd love to hear them. Thank you, everybody. Take care.